I was born in a dark, sad house. My dad was an alcoholic, and he worked all the time as a contractor. Dad was already divorced 2 times by the time he met my mom. My mom had no idea what she was getting herself into. When she married my dad, she had a package deal. My dad and 3 children from a previous marriage. 2 years into their marriage, I was born, their little Christmas gift. And 3 years later, my younger brother came along. My mom was scared and alone most of the time, with my dad working or drinking. Into that dark, sad home, my brother and I grew up. I can remember being 12 years old, riding the bus to school each day. I was an outcast on that bus, and junior high was an especially lonely time for me. I endured the taunts and teasing. I didn't apply myself, so I felt defeated and unaccomplished most of the time. One day, April Atherton sat down next to me on that bus. April was a tall, slender girl, kind of on the quiet side. She wasn't the most popular girl on our bus, but she definitely took a chance in sitting next to me that day. She talked to me about her church, and she invited me to come with her. I didn't have to think about it for very long. I told her no way, flat out. Even in the midst of my darkness, the sadness, even in the thick of all of that, I didn't know I had a God that loved me. April left me alone that next day and the day after that. But then she did something shocking. She convinced her mom to come to my house to persuade my parents to send me to church. The mom sat at the kitchen table over coffee and cookies that Mrs. Atherton had brought. At the end of that visit, it was decided that I would go to church. The first time I walked onto the campus of Holy Cross, it was Reformation Day. As I came on to campus, the service was about to start, and I walked around the corner and bumped right into the pastor. He was quite tall and robed. As I looked up at him, backlit with the setting sun, I stammered my apologies, and he came right down to my level, and he welcomed me. And in many ways, Pastor Wolkenhauer was a spiritual father figure to me. I can still see Pastor. That was probably the very first echo of Jesus I had ever experienced in my life. He had a kind face and smile that made you feel comfortable coming and talking with him. He had a twinkle in his eye whenever he was going to tell you a joke. Throughout my years at Holy Cross, I watched humility in action through Pastor. I watched as he raised 2 foster sons, which I thought was so cool. And I saw the way he interacted with the people at church. The love and humility he showed them was humility loud and clear. I walked to church or home whenever I went. My family was very happy I was going to church, but had no desire to go themselves. I can remember one Sunday I was sitting in the pew at church alone, and the lady in front of me was a short, older German lady. She had this haircut that was curly on top and sort of close cropped. It tapered down into this little V at the nape of her neck. At the end of her neck, and that little dimple was the most fascinating little tuft of hair. And I sat in the pew and I looked at that tuft of hair, and it was fascinating. So I had to touch it. I reached my hand out to touch that little tuft of hair, and she turned around with surprising speed, and she said, "Stop it! This is not how we worship in church." And she got up from her pew, and she came and she sat down next to me. She taught me how to use the hymnal. And the next Sunday when I came to church, she was standing in the narthex, waiting for me so that we could worship together. She could have just shaken her head and thought how irritating students were. Let's face it, I was irritating. You saw the picture. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to worship. I'm not even sure I knew who Jesus was. The people at Holy Cross echoed Christ. They took me in, welcomed me week after week, and they showed me what a life focused on God looked like. I went to 1 year of confirmation. I was baptized the week before I was confirmed, and by the time I went through the ceremony, I thought I had it all figured out. About a year later, I received a phone call from a guy named Mark. It seems he was the new DCE at Holy Cross, and he wanted to come for a visit in my house. Mark Blanke walked into my dark, sad house, into my dark, sad life, and he offered me hope. I wouldn't have called it hope at the time. At the time, I was just so happy there was a regular place and time where I could be a different Shelli than the sad, bushy-haired, unaccomplished Shelli I was everywhere else. Youth group for me was a place of equal playing fields, of learning important truths, even if I didn't yet know how to put them all together. I saw the humility of Christ echoed in the lives of the students and adults in my church. I began to see humility in action, one glimpse at a time. Mark stayed at Holy Cross throughout high school and into my first year of college. Throughout that time, he would talk to me on the rides home from youth group. He and his wife would open their home up, and me and the other students would come over and begin to see humility within a marriage. He was there when I went to dances. He took pictures. And he was there when I experienced failure. Not just that dress, but like failure. Mark really was a Jesus with skin on person in my life. And I was so sad when he took a call to Concordia, Chicago. Another student and I kept the youth group running until the church hired someone else. At that time, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, but I did know that that church and that community was a safe and loving place where I was getting to know a God that loved me and wanted a relationship. A short time later, I heard the call to go into DCE ministry, and I was so excited and nervous to be accepted at Concordia University in Irvine. My time at Concordia was fantastic. I learned so much about God and made amazing relationships, including meeting my sweet husband. After graduation, I began a 1-year internship. Yes, he is worth getting a clap for. After graduation, I began a 1-year internship, and Travis and I planned our wedding. One weekend home from internship, I discovered that Mom had lung cancer, and it didn't look good. To say that I was scared is a joke. I was terrified. How could I live without her? She knew every story, every experience. In so many ways, she was my rock. There were 8 weeks between her diagnosis and her death. My dad, brother, Travis, and I were there as she took her last breath, and we were devastated. For me, knowing Christ as I did, I was so sad to think that maybe my mom didn't. How scary it must be to die and not know God as I did. After her funeral, I was packing up her things and cleaning her room, and I saw on her nightstand a Bible. Poking up from the Bible was this index card with Bible verses written on them. Verses that talked about God and his love and his grace, his forgiveness. Verses that reminded and reintroduced my mom to a God that she used to know, but had somehow forgotten. My mom and Pastor Wolkenhauer spent much of those 8 weeks together, and he reminded her of who God was and how much he loved her. I'm confident that when my mom died, she knew Jesus, and that gives me so much peace. My mom's been gone 20 years. I have been a DCE for 20 years. Throughout that time, I have been about God's work in Southern California churches, and I've seen so many echoes of Christ's love and humility. Times when people have pooled their own resources and given up their own comforts to help others. Like the time when 4 8th grade girls pooled their allowance money, their babysitting funds, and solicited donations because another girl in their class and her mother were homeless. Seeing the look of surprised joy on that girl's face when she realized she was having a Christmas, and the radiant echo of Jesus on those 4 students' faces still brings me joy to this day. Times when myself and others have struggled between living the way we want to live and instead trying to live like Christ, to echo his love and humility in great and small ways. Seeing students torn between living how their friends are living and instead putting their agenda to the side and befriending that student, maybe the sad one with the bushy hair. God is not dependent upon our circumstances in order to be God. He is continually writing our story. God pulls out all the stops for us and for our good. He allowed me to grow up in a dark, sad house, but he wasn't content to leave me in the sadness. He showed his great love for me through the death and resurrection of his son, Jesus. The echo of grace and humility and love was evident in my life because he sent people to come and love me and tell me the truth about myself. And not only invite me to be a part of their community, but to work alongside them as he echoed through us into the lives of others. God didn't just love me, but my whole family. He never gave up on my mom, but sent Pastor to remind her of his love. And his pastoral example brought her peace as she prepared to enter eternal life. You might not connect with my story, or maybe you do. I don't know what kind of home you're growing up in, but I do know that the same God who never gave up on me continually seeks you out too. He is loving you and wanting to walk with you in obedience and faith. There are so many distractions in this life, so many ups and downs and twists and turns. I stand here before you today because of this God and because of April Atherton, that lady in church, Pastor Wolkenhauer, and Mark Blanke. In each of their lives was the echo of humility, the humility of Christ. What I didn't realize until I was packing her things was that that echo had reached to my mom as well. Because of April and Pastor and Mark and the church, God reassured my mom in her last days. Looking at the great love that God has given to you and to me, I'm so thankful for all the people that have echoed into my life and for the ways that God has used me to echo into the lives of others. How is God using you? Where is God using you to echo into the lives of others?